Everyone, welcome to CDT Online then. Right, so let's get started. Right, we're on the E4 project now, as you know. Just a little reminder, the E4 project is a combination of 3 units, Unit 11, Unit 10, Unit 15, and we have already started doing a bit of idea generation on paper and in Blender, done a bit of character development, a little bit of environment modeling also. So we're going to move on to some of the research tasks. I think that's more suitable for remote working. So we do have an LO1 for each one of these units. So we've got task 1, 3 different task 1s to work through. We're going to start off with the 3D modeling research. So I've got some slides to go over what this learning outcome needs to cover. So Unit 11, Learning Outcome 1 is understanding how 3D modeling is used in creating assets for media products. And it's split into 2. There's 2 pass elements to this learning outcome. How 3D modeling techniques are used for media products and explaining how they're used in so describing 3D modeling techniques for media products and explaining how they're used. Okay, so we're just going to talk about P1 in this video, and then we'll move on to P2 later on. So P1, we've got to look at different types of modeling, how models move, so animation, and how environments change. So first of all, let's just very briefly cover a few different types of modeling techniques. You guys need to go away and research these yourself a bit further. I just thought I may as well give you a really brief introduction so you're not just diving at this completely blind. So we've got to look at polygon modeling, which is the technique that you guys have been using already. So any 2D shape with 3 or more corners is a polygon. And then we connect those polygons together to create a 3D model. Very quickly, polygons are made up of verts, edges, and faces. You know this already. There are 3 different kind of categories of polygon: triangles, which obviously have 3 sides or edges, and then quads, which have 4, and then anything more than that is known as an n-gon. So something like this might be an n-gon. So n-gons and triangles are, just on a little side note, not recommended. So they do, or there's potential certainly to cause problems later on when you're deforming a mesh with a rig, for example, when you come to animation. So we tend to try and stick to quads. But we can talk about that stuff later on. So first type of modeling, polygon modeling. You guys are experts at that already. Second type we've got to look at is NURBS, which stands for non-uniform rational basis spline. Don't worry about what those mean necessarily. You just need to be aware that this is a technique that's used in engineering essentially and industrial design. So for car design, you can see in this GIF that we've got the shape, the curve shape being mapped to these control points. It's a really useful technique. If you've got to design a car bonnet or the wing for a car or something, NURBS are the way to go. Spline modeling is similar, but it uses curves. Spline is just a kind of 3D modeling term for curve. So if you've ever used Illustrator before and used a vector Bezier curve, similar situation, but in 3D, you can see that there is a curve and there is geometry. There is this mesh that's been applied to that curve. This curve here has 3 different anchor points, 1, 2, 3, and you can control those anchor points. You can control the curve of that curve, and then Blender or your 3D modeling software can skin them and apply geometry to that. And then the other type of modeling, it's not really a type of modeling, but it's a technique that's used as part of the modeling process. So using modifiers, Blender comes with a huge number of different modifiers. So the common ones are the subdivision surface modifier, which we can see in this GIF here. So this is a non-destructive way of adding extra geometries. So it's a little bit like an adjustment layer in Photoshop. So applying a subsurf modifier, for example, just adds the appearance of extra geometry that isn't actually there. So you can see when I go into edit mode on this cube, the starting cube is still there, but it's the modifier that's applying these extra subdivisions. So you can essentially turn a cube into a sphere. And then in my example, you can see me adding a couple of loop cuts to add harder edges to the initial sphere. So that's pretty cool. Any kind of boxy character or object that you make, you can apply the subsurf to it and it'll smooth off all your corners, and then you can go back in and start sort of squaring things off again. We've got an example here of a Boolean modifier happening. So this Boolean modifier is used to, well, there's 2 or 3 different ways you can use it. The most common one is for cutting one shape out of another shape. So here, the example, you can see the cylinder is being used to cut that shape out of a cube. So we apply the Boolean modifier to the cube. We use the cylinder object, and with the difference setting, you can see me move the cylinder out of the way, and we're left with the hole that cylinder's made. All right. So the next part we need to look at is how 3D models move, so animation essentially. So we'll look at a couple of different ways we can make 3D models move in Blender or any 3D software. So rigging is this process of creating an armature or rig, which is made up of different bones, and then you you sort of parent the mesh to the armature. So the armature becomes the parent, the mesh is the child. So anywhere where the bones move, the mesh moves with it. So you can see this example here quite clearly. So any character that you need to pose or you need to animate, you will need a rig. Another way that we can move models or deform models is using a technique called shape keys. And this allows us to literally deform different parts of a mesh object. So you can see me here applying a base shape key, which stores the geometry of the initial shape. You then go in edit mode. You then add a second shape key and you go in edit mode. You can see me doing that now in edit mode, moving part of that mesh. Then when you come back out, it reverts the original base key, and using the value slider, we can deform the mesh. And we can keyframe that value so we can animate that deformation. So you can combine all sorts of different shape keys for various different effects, really commonly used for facial expressions. So, you can add a shape key to the verts around the mouth and create a smile or a frown, that kind of thing. Keyframes, we're going to be using a lot of. So anything in Blender that has a value to it, whether it's location, rotation, scale, or color, or focal length, we can add keyframes to, and we can animate those properties. So here I am animating the location property. So I'm moving a cube on the x-axis. I'm keyframing it in frame 0 in this position. I'm adding a keyframe in frame 120 and moving the keyframe, moving the object, and then Blender fills in the gaps. You actually do it the other way around. You add the keyframe initially, you then move the playhead along to where you want it, to the correct position in time, and then move the object to where you want it to be at that time, and you add another keyframe. So in the past, obviously before computers, animators would draw out those keyframes. So they draw out the character in a certain pose, and then think about what that next key pose would be, draw that, and then they'd hand those 2 poses to somebody that's getting paid a lot less, and they'd draw all the frames in between. So now computers can do that for us, and that process is known as tweening. This is a bit of a strange one, how lighting is used to move models, because strictly speaking, lights don't really make models move, but we can impact how a model is rendered, how a model looks, obviously, with different lighting situations. So you'll need to research yourself the different lamps available in Blender. So looking at point lamps, sun lamps, spot lamps, and hemis, and looking at the various different settings and thinking about how they can be used to change the mood and the atmosphere, or how you can communicate what time of day it is. using different lights. And then we're going to look at lights again, but this time it's for environments. So the next part of P1 is looking at how we can change or alter environments with different techniques. So the first one, again, looking at lights, the same sort of situation. We can control the position of a light, how bright it is, the size. We can create really sharp shadows or really soft shadows. And all of these settings, again, determine how the audience kind of responds to that scene, how they understand what time of day it is, what sort of mood you're trying to create with that use of lighting. And then cameras is something else that can be used. Cameras can be used in combination with animation to emphasize movement. So we could have a camera panning as a character runs across the screen, and the speed of that pan, the distance of the camera from the character can create certain effects. I'd like you to look at how that could be used. So using pans, how we can use cameras to zoom, but also just thinking about how cameras can be used to cut between different shot types, different camera angles, and how those choices affect what it is you're communicating to your audience about what's happening in the scene at that time. In this example, I'm just keyframing the orthographic scale of an orthographic camera to create, and that's on this slider here, to create this zoom effect on my tree dude. And the other way we can, this is a little bit more relevant, I think, to changing environments, so physics simulations. So I've seen a couple of the more astute students among you experimenting with physics simulations, which is pretty cool to see. So the common one, obviously, is smoke and mist and that kind of thing. Physics simulations can be used to create rain, water, or sort of flecks in the atmosphere. They can be used for cloth simulations. We can use physics to simulate cloth moving in the wind or moving with a character. So for clothing, for example. So I'd like you to look at the different physics options in Blender and discuss how they can be used to create effects in an environment. And then the last one I think to look at is using modifiers again to change an environment. So we are literally changing the mesh here in this example. This isn't my example this time. You can see a little flash of where I stole this. So this came from YouTube. This is, I think, a minute and a half, this tutorial, and it goes over using this displacement modifier in combination with a texture. And so you subdivide a face, or you subdivide a plane, and then you apply the modifier, combine that modifier with a texture, and you can move the coordinates, the position of that texture across the surface, and it creates this, and keyframe that value or those values, and it creates that effect of the water moving. So just to recap quickly, so we've covered different types of modeling, very briefly, how we can make models move with different animation techniques, and how we can alter or change environments. So we're going to leave the second part of this learning outcome for another day, and I'll just very quickly look at the pro forma that you're going to be working through. So this is on the website, and I'll probably post it on Classroom too. There's a few keywords at the top there. I've copied that in from the spec. And then we have some questions for you to answer. And I've added some keywords that I'd like to use in each of the sections. So please make sure you try and use as many of these keywords as possible, and make sure you make them bold as well, so that it's a lot easier for me to scan through and check you're on the right tracks. We've got a few references in there. These are ones that are recommended by the exam board, but I honestly think you'll be able to find better ones yourself, just getting onto YouTube, getting online and looking up this stuff for yourself. So the idea is that for each of the different types of modeling techniques, I want you to find a visual example. I had started off previously, this was 2 visual examples. I've cut that down to you finding one visual example of Polygon Modeling. So this could be a YouTube video or an article online, or even better, finding a specific article about this technique being used for an actual game or an actual animation. So that's what's really good about the periodicals. That's what's really good about the 3D artist magazines that we've got in N20. Unfortunately, we don't have access to them right now. But you'll be able to find plenty of these kind of things online. So finding a visual example and explaining how the technique's been used, and then trying to explain how an artist would use that technique in a game or an animation. So for each of those techniques, that's what I'd like you to do. Find an example, explain how it'd be used. Okay. I've given some suggestions for modifiers to look at. So for the modifiers, this might be one to look at the Blender manual for, or YouTube. So looking at subdivision surface modifier that we talked about in the slides, the mirror modifier, Boolean, displacement, etc. So again, finding examples and putting pictures in here, please, links to the videos. I think it actually states in the unit spec that you need to include all your sources. So please put in links to these examples. And then for how 3D models move, again, I've added in some keywords that I'd like to use for each of the techniques. And similar theme, explain how movement of characters or objects is created with each of those techniques. So first of all, explain how it's created with rigging, and then find a specific example of rigging. So again, this could be a YouTube tutorial, but it would be much better if you could find an article about somebody who's employed as a rigger for Pixar or for a game studio, talking about a specific project they worked on. Explain how movement of characters is created with shape keys. Same thing, find an example of shape keys being used. So that might be a trickier one to find. YouTube videos will be perfect there. Keyframes, you'll find plenty of information on keyframe animation for 3D. And if you can keep it to Blender stuff, that's going to make more sense for you guys. I think actually this task here is, out of all the task ones that we have to do, this is, well, I don't know, I think this one will actually be the more practical, because it's going to give you a bit of an understanding of techniques that you're going to be using. So again, explain how movement or alteration of characters is created by lighting. And then we're on to how environments change. And again, I've got keywords there. Explain how 3D environments can be changed with lighting. Find specific examples. Camera techniques. Physics. And then the displacement modifier. So that one there, find a YouTube tutorial on how to create that low poly water effect. And think about if it's something that you might want to use in your own animation. And then we'll get on to P2 later on. So in terms of resources, I have posted a couple of links in here. I'll try my best to find some more links that can go into Classroom for you. But just you know what the topics are. Just get them Googled and do your best. The Blender manual is going to be, I think, a good reference for you for this task. There will be a 2.79 manual out there also. I'm pretty sure they've got that online. So, you can search the Blender manual for rigging, for example. Helps if you spell it correctly, I imagine. So we've got camera rigs, animation, and rigging. And there'll be a huge section on how to set these kind of things up in Blender. There's a whole section there on shape keys. So read the manual pages, look at videos, try and find examples from the real world, please. And then I will be, or myself, Laura, and Emma will be posting our expectations for each lesson in terms of what parts of this document you need to be working at that time. And then I'm sure we'll get through it. So please, any questions, fire away, and I'll see you in the next video.